Welcome to Baseball and Coffee with Tino and Aaron. What's up, Aaron?
Not too much. Ready to talk first base.
Sweet. Sorry, we were laughing. We are just talking about our buddy being the jerk and watching playoff football today.
Yeah.
All right. So today on Baseball and Coffee, we are going to cover our top 16 at first base. Um, at first glance, what are you thinking about around first base? How do you feel about first base?
No coffee story, huh?
We're
Just
coming.
jumping in.
We'll get there.
Okay.
We'll get
All right.
there.
Now, yeah, I sent you a text a couple of days ago. I was like, man, I'm struggling with this. To me, there was a clear top four, and I even divided that into two tiers. And then after that, it was just, the way I ended up organizing it, and we'll talk through it, but
Uh-huh.
it's a deep position, and I thought there was different kinds of players, but
Mhm.
I had a really hard time separating just because I think there's some different skill sets.
Mhm.
Obviously a lot of power at the position, um, but a lot of large percent of it don't offer much else.
Right.
But yeah, was a challenging position to try to rank.
It is. I think I agree with you. I think there's a top six or so for me, and then not a fall off as much as it is. There are some gambles, right? Some rolls of the dice. But yeah, interesting position. Another one where it's deep enough where you can kind of pick and choose what stats you want and whether you want to wait on the position, get your power, and then draft another position a bit higher. But excited to get into it. Yeah, quickly, coffee story. What do you got for this week?
Yeah, so my coffee story quickly was just going to be, I can't remember if we talked about it on the show or just offline, but in India was a coffee that you
Uh-huh.
had come across in your subscription service, and
Mhm.
we had a couple of Indian coffees on our menu. They've since retired, but I was going through my coffee order today, and I had about 45 grams of one of my favorites that we had. It's called Ratnagiri Estate, but so I got ground that up. It's going to be my coffee in the morning.
Nice.
But I just wanted to share that with you because it was you had an experience with that coffee, and I think India is not necessarily in specialty. It's not something you hear a ton about, but our coffee buyer just came back from there, and he's gonna have some really unique things to share. Some more to come on that, but
Sweet.
yeah, so just super excited to have that in the morning.
Right on, man. Uh, so I've got two quick things. First one is Mexico is the last one to, or the latest coffee to arrive. I have not opened it yet. Um, I happened to find a bag of Ethiopia at the store from the Walla Walla Roastery that was actually 7 days off of roast, which is not
Mm.
not common at the grocery store. Usually, the grocery store gets stuff later that they don't sell in at the shop, and so going through that first before I open the Mexico. But excited for the Mexico. The other one is uh, uh, someone in the house who will remain nameless got some liquid in the container that I use to weigh the coffee and a little bit in the top of the grinder. And I didn't know that before I started grinding. And so I had the adventure of taking the baratza apart to unclog it and brush it out and whatnot. And I assume it's probably a necessary uh, a necessary thing to do, but unexpectedly and not always fun. I
So
tell that
but you're
story.
able to you salvaged it. You got to
Yeah,
work in.
yeah, it was fine. But I
Good,
say that because
good.
for coffee folks, it's most folks look at that and be like, oh, no big deal, whatever. Coffee folks, it's like you freak the heck out and start taking everything apart immediately, worried that it's going to be done for. In any case, let's get started with first base. Again, the format is we'll go through our top 16, kind of go back and forth, maybe address a couple of the other players outside of the 16, talk about pros and cons of each. We both tend to tier our players a bit. We can do that or not, depending on whether we feel like it. Who is your number one, Aaron Alvis?
Matt Olson.
Me too. Me too. Uh, I think it's pretty clear to me, as much as I love Freddie Freeman, I roster him in our home league. It's pretty clear to me when you look at specifically runs and RBIs, and then the home run difference between the two players. There's not a whole lot of argument. It's hard to argue against those 54 home runs last year. And while I don't expect him to hit 54 this year, the counting stats are just ridiculous, specifically in that lineup. And it's all far outweighs the 23 stolen bases that Freddie Freeman had last season. I'm stating the obvious. Is there anything under the hood that you found that you don't like about his approach, or that you think signal reason for caution?
No, I think it was just impressive looking at the skills. A couple years ago, I remember we had our first base episode. You pushed really hard for him to be higher in Dynasty. And at that time, he was striking out quite a bit more.
Mm-hmm.
I think he specifically struggled with pitches up in the zone. He's clearly, he's closed that hole. And I think the other thing that stuck out to me about him is, yes, his fly ball rate is 43%, but he's not super pull hoppy. And his launch angle is 16.1. And so he's got that swinging strike rate down to 12%, striking out 23%. And that's just the advancement. I think he's always had a good OBP.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, just the reduction in the swing and miss and the keeping the power. I flip flop back and forth because I think there's a lot of power disposition, as I said at the top.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think it's kind of like, how do you want, you really can't go wrong. How do you want to start your team, right? Do you want just like 5 category balance with Freeman, or do you really want to take the best power player at a position as the carrying tool?
Mm-hmm.
And he's not, again, with the way he's spraying the ball, he's not pulling it as much as a lot of people at the position.
Right.
He's not striking out as much. You mentioned the counting stats. So I think he's gonna, last year he hit 283. I mean, that means, let's see what his BABIP was 302. So that's not ridiculous. It's only 5
Right.
points above the average. So if he's gonna hit 270, 280, and with all that power, it's just really hard. And I ultimately decided I'd blunt the power first. It was a very hard choice over Freeman.
Mm-hmm. I think the things that put him over the top for me are first, obviously the home runs, right? You got the next guy on my top 16 home runs wise is Alonso at 46, and that's 8 less than Olson hit last year. And there's no one else in the 40s. And with Alonso, you're giving up all average in hits. And then the next guy after that, I believe, is Christian Walker on my list at 33. And so 21 home runs more than the third place guy on the list at first base is enough of a differentiator in a category that impacts runs, RBIs, and OPS, right? It's for me, it's pretty clear. I don't necessarily expect him to continue to hit home runs at that pace, just because that's not something we see this day and age. There's no real skills reason as to why not. But as far as, having perennial 50 plus home run types of dudes, it's just not really what we see these days. And I think, I forgot which podcast it was I was listening to. It might have been Rates and Barrels, where they were talking about him closing that hole. Like you said, he had a hole at the top of the zone to high fastballs, and he's closed it, and said that it's hurt him with breaking balls low, but he just kind of spits on those now, which speaks to his ability to progress as a hitter and actually implement it in his game. But yeah, Olson for me, especially when you take into context that are into consideration that park, you take into consideration that offense, the guys in front of him who are getting on base all the time. It's, to me, he's pretty clearly number one. He's also 5 years younger than Freddie Freeman, and that means something, whether it's, obviously it does in Dynasty, but it also does as far as deterioration of skill, right? As they get older. So sounds like he's a clear-cut number one for both of us. Do we both have Freeman at 2?
Yeah.
I'll ask you the same question. I think that from a counting stats standpoint, most folks know Freeman is, going to provide you a lot of production across the board. You get steals from first base, which you don't ordinarily. He doesn't drive in quite as many runs as you might think he would, just because he hits so high in the order, and he's not a huge power hitter anymore. Is there anything in Freeman's profile that you love, or that you approach with caution?
Um, I would take the under on the stolen bases, as you said. However, I don't think he's a zero. I
Mhm.
know a lot of guys are going to talk about you can write in a zero, but I think him having 23 last year, there's nothing from a speed perspective that would say he's going to do that. He's never done it before. So I
Mhm.
think a lot of people are going to would quote that and say he's number one for that reason. I don't think that's something you can count on. I'd be hesitant on that. I definitely think he's going to get 8 to 12. I think you could write that down and pin just because he's a good base runner and he's smart. Um, he obviously can do it. I think the thing that impresses me is just this. I've been looking at something I've added to my analysis is quality of contact, so not just barrels, but all favorable contact. And he was at 49.5%. And I have yet, I mean, we're only on our second position, but I've been studying, going through the whole, player pool without, the focus on each position. I haven't seen one that high. And it doesn't surprise me, but to see his name as the highest one I've seen by 5 or 6% doesn't surprise me. Um, yeah, you just he makes so much gun. He swings a lot too. That's the other thing that sticks out to me. His zone swing was almost 80%. That's really high.
Right.
Um, yeah, he chases just to take over league average, so he's got that separation of swinging a lot, but also not chasing. So uh, yeah, he's a tremendous hitter, and as you said, hitting number two. It'd be interesting to see if he hits third this year. Like you said, his RBIs have not been as high as you would think.
Mhm.
But what I've seen is they're going to do Betts, Otani, Freeman, um, Will Smith, and then Muncy. But we'll see how that shakes out.
That will change. I think that changes the prognosis with Freeman a bit if he's hitting third behind those two superstars, because at that point now he's got, I think he goes from the 102 RBIs this season, provided health and still hitting the way he does, to 115, 120 RBI sort of opportunities, right? Because the bottom of that Dodgers lineup wasn't great last year and he was hitting second. I think it changes everything. 370 BABIP is, he's run high BABIPs in his career. That gives me a little pause just because the number is so high. Maybe he hits 310 instead of 331, like he did last year. It's just such an interesting, he's such an interesting hitter because he doesn't pull the ball a ton, right? He
Mm-hmm.
doesn't, he's so balanced. His spray chart is balanced, his ground ball to fly ball is balanced. Like you said, he chases a bit just over league average. His chase contact is about 10% above league average, which is something that tends to go as he gets older. And so I like the fact that that's still way above league average. And he's, is almost like the perfect player in some ways, the 15.2-degree launch angle, right? Like everything,
Yeah,
it's kind of like you would build your prototypical first
yeah.
baseman, and that's kind of who he comes out as. And for dynasty purposes and like for our league, the question for me is obviously how long can he continue doing what he's doing? And is there a right time to sell him, or do you just hold on to him until he's done? I don't know what that answer is. I will say I do expect 15 to 20 steals. I say that because he's at 35th percentile sprint speed, right? And so clearly his stolen bases are coming from um, kind of smarts, right, and instinct, and not from actually being fast. And if the only reason I could see is they tell him to stop running, or he decides it's too much of an injury risk, because the ability to steal bags is not going to go away. And so,
Right.
say he takes less risk, and you're looking at 15. That's still a leg above most first basemen on this list. So I don't know. I don't I don't see that. If we in Roto, I would see Freeman. I could see the argument for Freeman at one, because steals are such a focus in Roto. I think for our purposes and for head to head, I'm
Mm,
very comfortable with him at two. The other
yeah.
thing is,
It was tough. I flip flopped several times, but
mhm,
had to make a call.
I do worry about his longevity, right? Because he is 34 years old, and he did have 730 plate appearances last season, but his contract runs through 27. And so obviously they expect him to be around for another 3 years, and I think that's huge. Is this the end of your
Did you
tier?
hear that story that like Dave Roberts would try to get him a day off and he would basically get pissed?
Yeah.
And that like eventually at the end of the season he like negotiated like you're gonna rest this day.
Yeah.
It was like it took all season.
It's so crazy.
Uh
So one
yeah,
other
this is the end of that. Go ahead.
statistically, something else to add with him is that in our league, we do measure hits instead of average, which is such a huge kind of toggles the meter towards plate appearances, right? And towards just finding players that grind and grind and grind. And the 730 plate appearances and 211 hits is in this day and age is just nuts to have 211 hits in a season. And so that also is something to consider for me. When I look at this list, right, is if you're in a hits league like we are, it's the next guy on my list had 134. Granted, he was hurt, but then Pete Alonso, as an example, had 123, almost 90. He had 88 more hits than Pete Alonso did.
Mm-hmm.
That's
Yeah,
something we don't think of hits as a category always, and I think in our own heads when we're evaluating players, at least I.
right.
But when you look at that and you consider it's one of our categories, it's a big deal.
Mm-hmm.
So this is the end of the tier for you.
Yes.
Okay, who's next?
So my next tier is also a tier of two. I have Bryce and Vladdy.
All right. I have those two in my top five. I go Bryce, Alonso, Vladdy, and I actually have Casas at the bottom of that tier at 6. Let's start with Bryce since we both have him there. He's obviously first base eligible this season, as well as outfield. How are you? What do you expect from him? I guess is a better question.
Yeah, so I mentioned the quality of contact that I've been looking at. You know, Bryce was third on the list for me. His second half last year, after he got acclimated to first base and comfortable with his surgically repaired arm, is 296, 413, 583, with 18 home runs and six steals. So, you know, I expect like 35, 10. You know, kind of with flirting with a 400 OBP because that's kind of what he's been doing. And that second half showed me that he's back to full health. And I think there was a transition for him playing first,
Mm-hmm.
even though he was a right fielder. You know, we saw Betts do a similar thing with much more ease, but it was a big adjustment for him
Mm-hmm.
as well as, you know, recovering from the injury. So to me, that shows me that he's fully healthy and he just has a lot more stability, you know, 50% barrel rate, his, you know, 50% walk rate. You know, he swung and missed a little bit more, 60% swinging strike, but still was exceptionally productive. Um, I think he is going to hit per average. You know, not as good as Freeman, obviously, but I think you know hits an average or something that resonate with me. So yeah, I think you know that's what I expect, and that's where I have Bryce there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, he's another 100 runs, 100 RBIs, as you said, 30, 35 home runs, 10 steals. I think he's production across the board. I don't know if he has quite the ceiling as the other two do, which is weird to say because Harper's always been an unlimited ceiling guy, right? But yeah, Harper at 3 that's exactly where I had him. Same reasons. If there are any cracks, as you said, the 16% swinging strike rate, and then sorry, where's the other number here? Some of his other numbers are just like his chase contact is below league average, his chase is above league average. Like there's some things there that have been there for a lot of his career, but I think if he starts to physically deteriorate at all, those cracks that I just pointed out would become bigger, and that's something to watch out for. But as far as redraft and this year, yeah, I love Harper at 3.
Yeah, I mean he was only Olson had a better you know barrel rate of position, and only he
Mhm.
has the only one that had a better um, top 50% of his exit velocity. So if Olson was in the field, he'd be hitting the ball the hardest and maybe have this position.
Right.
And again, that was coming off a pretty major injury. So I think the power is still there, and I love the approach.
Right. I will say philosophically, it's interesting. I think this off season we're starting to see a little bit of conversation around what to value and why.
Yeah.
I think for me, I have hard hit and barrel on my spreadsheet, but I don't look at it quite as much. I think that the seeing players, we'll have a conversation today and we have offline about guys like Isaac Paredes and Alex Bregman and Marcus Simeon and some of these guys who are really kind of have one skill that they're really good at, which is to lift and pull and don't hit the ball as hard as others do, but still have 30 home runs because of that skill. I think I personally can get caught up in hard hit and barrel being really high and saying, oh, I should expect more home runs from that guy and not seeing the player who's able to place the ball where they want to. And so I think starting with that ability to hit the ball really hard is great. But I also think there are other ways to come to power outside of just being able to hit the ball that hard. Freeman, I think, is a great example of someone who doesn't, 11% barrel rate, almost 42% hard hit rate, 111 max EV, 90 miles an hour average EV. Those numbers are good, not great, but because he's able to put the ball where he wants to, it makes him, an elite player. So I agree with you. Those skills are sought after and important. I just think it's an interesting conversation to have about.
No, I agree. And I think you spoke to this last time we talked to, like just evolving, right? Every year you kind of evolve, you grow when you spend as much time as we do. Like hard hit is on grow on my sheet. I've looked at because I just think that it's not as descriptive as I want it to be.
Right.
And there are other stats, and then like looking at stats in context of other ones. It's just to color it more, right? And because that number in and of itself, I found it to be sort of one dimensional. But yeah, good point.
So Harper at 3. I have Alonso at 4. Where do you have Alonso?
Well, I have everyone else in the same tier.
Okay,
So I have him the top of my power tier.
got it. I'll just speak on him quickly. I think we all know what Pete Alonso is, right? He's gonna get 600 plus plate appearances. He's gonna hit likely 40 plus home runs. He's gonna score 90-ish runs, maybe more. He's gonna drive in a ton. 118 last season. He hit 217, and that really dragged that plus a sub 10% walk rate. Really dragged everything down a bit. So 822 OPS, which is super low for a 46 home run hitter. But he doesn't strike out as much as you expect him to. 22.9% last season and a 10.3% swinging strike rate. He's your prototypical right-handed slugger, 47.7% fly ball rate, 44.4% pull. I think that when I look at his numbers, he chases slightly above average, chase contact is above average. I think there's some selectivity issues with his approach that drag his average down, right? I think the ground balls that he hits are, I wouldn't say unintentional, but pretty darn unintentional because he's looking to hit so many pull side home runs. And his BABIP was 205 last season, which you can attribute slightly to, the 47.7% fly ball rate, but it shouldn't be that low. So there's something about the fact that he doesn't walk more than 10% of the time, as feared of a slugger as he is, and that is his BABIP was so low. To me, again, there's some selectivity issues in his approach that I think he needs to work through. I don't love the Mets as an organization and their ability to teach. It's not to say that they can't, but I do wonder what happens with his approach. I would like to see. I'm not going to be the one to take him as my fourth rated first baseman, despite the production, because I want to see more from that approach. That approach really does scare me a bit. Do you have anything to add on Alonso?
Yeah, I think you put that really eloquently. He's, the chase rate just to take above average, but he's swinging pretty low percentage time, 64% zone swing.
Mm-hmm.
And then I mentioned the quality of contact. He was below 40%, and yet he has a almost 50% barrel rate. So if he doesn't barrel it, he's not making good contact nearly as much as his peers.
Right.
And I kind of referenced this because I think it was an episode I remember a lot because Matt was on with this, and we had a lot of fierce debate about these guys.
Hmm.
And one of the things that impressed me about him at the time was he made a lot more contact and he didn't have a swinging strike rate. So I thought for someone who was hitting the ball as hard as he was, uh, to have like the lack of swing and miss, I really like that about his profile. Now I see a guy that's 29 starting to develop some of these plate approach issues, and yes, he delivers power and spades, but I'm just not seeing the balance in the profile and in the plate approach that I
Hmm.
think is going to make it easy for him to necessarily get out of that. So yeah, he's definitely, I think, a premium of the power players and most established, but not very appealing for me.
Right. Well, you look at what's interesting in my mind when I think about Alonso this season is 46 homers is the floor, pretty much, right? Because he hit 217 in a horrible
Right.
battle. And I don't expect like the K rate and the swinging strike rate and whatnot to go down, or I mean to go up much, because he is pretty much right there at his, just kind of just post peak. And that's great if you are the kind of fantasy player that can stomach a lower average at first base with that many plate appearances. But you can't ignore 92 runs, 46 homers, 118 RBIs, right? That's premium production. Uh, the most interesting player on this list to me is Vladimir Guerrero Jr. You have him at 4, you said, and I have him at 5. Is that right?
Correct. Yeah.
I'll let you go, get us started with Vladdy. I still love him. Um, I don't quite know what to make of his approach, though. Go ahead and dig in for us.
Yeah. So I looked. So here's his OPS the last 4 seasons, going from lowest in the past to most recent: 772, 1002, 819, 789.
Mm-hmm.
Here's his home runs: 15, 48, 32, 26.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a clear outlier, right? The 1000 OPS season and the 48 home run season. And I think the projections see that and they see his age, and they're projecting him for 31 home runs this year and a 280, 359, 498 line. It's hard to separate, in a keeper league like we play in, or hybrid keeper, versus like a 1 year league. I can understand in a league that has a multi-year facet why you want to continue to invest in the talent, right? Because his blend of ability to make contact and his ability to hit the ball with power is pretty rare.
Mm-hmm.
Usually there's a toggle between the two, and he brings both of those tools potentially, like in his skill set. But he has not been able, as I just mentioned, he's had one season where that really all came together.
Right.
Um, and yet we all, I think, just kind of keep waiting for him to do it again, or expect him to do it, and then we get disappointed when he doesn't.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I don't see anything in the necessarily other than the results and the launch angle. And then, he's just been a little bit inconsistent early in his career, but he still is 24, right? And so typically, the aging curve, guys are going to start to, this is that period where if they're going to improve, it's going to be ending into their age 26, 27 season, then the skills reach a plateau before things start right. So he could still improve, right? He could still make adjustments. Um, these aren't fantasy stats, but I think he's a below average fielder, he's a below average runner. What he can do with the bat. But as he continues to age, I just wonder, you know, is he going to be able to get to all those tools that he's demonstrated 1 year and that we all keep hoping that he'll get to.
Right.
But yeah, sub 180 ISO still hits the crap out of the ball. 104 was his best speed, or his top 50% of his hard hit rate,
Mm-hmm.
which is phenomenal, right? Yeah, his quality of contact is pretty middling. So he's getting under it some. He's topping it a lot, hitting the ground with the ball on the ground a lot. 118 WRC plus last year, which is good, right? It's good.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think he's gonna disappoint you if you draft him as the fourth first baseman. But I think a lot of people just keep expecting him to hit that like rocket and go up to number one. But
Right.
I think he'd be a good solid investment. I think as long as your expectations are, you know, low 20s home runs, a good average. I think he's he's shown that he can do that year in and year out, right? You can count on at least a 780 and an OPS.
I I think I'm more optimistic, even though you have him at 4 and I have him at 5. Um, so the ground ball rate, as you excuse me, alluded to with the launch angle, 46.2% last year, which is a tad high. Doesn't strike out a ton, 14.7% strikeout rate. Hits the ball. He does hit the ball really hard when he does, almost all the time, 92.1 mile an hour average exit or average exit velocity, 117 max. For one thing, the outlier season in 21 was rabbit ball, and they played a lot of their home games in Dunedin, Florida, which is a launching pad. So I think that's when Simeon hit 45, I believe, something like that. It was nuts. That season was for that particular team. So that to me is an outlier. I do think that's why we see projections that we do. But and this is softer. Yeah, he had 45 home runs in 21 that same season for Toronto. This is going to sound silly, or it might sound silly to some. I think about his dad, the fact that his dad is a Hall of Famer. He's got a tremendous amount of pride. Not that everyone else doesn't, but he has tremendous amount of pride. His dad's a Hall of Famer. I think his ability to make adjustments or learn how to make adjustments is still developing. I think he's gotten to this point because of talent, and not necessarily some of the other things that some other players have to do to get there, right? And this is when he's just starting to grind, and he's just starting to have to learn how to play and learn how to hit. I believe in that lineage. I believe in maybe it's biased because I grew up watching Griffey, but there is something about who he is and his DNA that says to me, okay, you have this incredible bat to ball skill that's just different, right? That everybody fell in love with, and you're not producing the results that you want. I think with the right coaching, he's able to tweak that in a way that some others may not. So my expectations from him is mid-30s home runs this season. I think the offense around him is going to dictate some of those counting stats, right? Is, Bo Bichette going to come back to being who he was previously? Is Alejandro Kirk going to satisfy some of the expectations that have been there? George Springer, what is he going to bring this year? Is Dalton Varsho a scrub, or is he actually decent, right? There are some external factors that are going to impact his counting stats, but from a quality of contact, home run number, kind of OPS standpoint, I expect him to be in the 850s, and I expect him to hit 33, 35 home runs. And again, part of that for me is just because he's Vladimir Guerrero Jr. We're not talking about Christian Walker, right? We're talking about, or Yandy Diaz even. We're talking about Vladimir Guerrero Jr., and I think he's just more talented than, really, honestly, he and Harper are kind of, probably Freeman too, but they're in a category on their own from a talent standpoint. And I'm never going to really give up on that. That's more of a soft approach. It's not hard numbers, but I think that he's one of the few that I would look at that way.
No, 100%. And I think for me, I've haven't had the chance to roster him in fantasy, so I'm not as invested in everyone else as I think some people are. But to me, we talked about hits earlier, right? He's projected to have the second most hits of the position.
Mm-hmm.
And to me, the reason I have him at 4 for my rankings is because I value that. He's a good hitter. Mm-hmm. He's going to hit for a good average. He's going to put a lot of balls in play. He's going to hit them hard. And I'd be okay with getting 25 home runs. So like you said, you expect more. That's great. But I would be happy just to get the guy who's going to hit 280, 290 right at first base, who has plus power still. So yeah.
And 280, 290 is different at first, right? Like you've got some first baseman. So Naylor, as an example, 308 last season, 17 home runs. You've got Steer at 271. Yandy hit 330. but you got a lot of guys who are 230, 240, 250, and that's kind of par for the course, right? And so if you're looking at Vladdy and you think he's a 280, he's just a 280, 290 hitter on an average year, and he's going to get the plate appearances. There's a lot to gain from that. That's something a
Yeah.
little bit kind of a secondary number because we all get attracted to certain bright, shiny numbers. But it's just as important as the next one is. Who do you have at 5?
All right, so we're gonna have to have this conversation sooner or later because I really don't have them ranked 5 to 16. So I have, again, I kind of have all this guys grouped together.
Sure.
But I have preferences within the subsets. So I have 4 guys that I called like 5 tool guys who are, give you 5 categories. And I have 3 guys in what I call my balance tier. So like they give you a little bit of everything, but don't excel at everything.
Sure.
I have 1 unicorn. You can guess who that is. So I can't put anybody else in the bucket with him. Hello, Yandi.
Sure.
2 guys I call power light, and then 7 guys are just like power, and that's all that you get.
Got it.
Primarily power.
Mhm.
So I have preferences within those subsets. I have them in order, but I really couldn't, with any conviction, say I want this guy over this guy and this guy over this guy. And so, and again, I apologize for not being linear about it.
That's
But
all right.
this is the way I could organize it, where I could say, okay, I like this guy better than this guy, and this guy
Sure.
better than this guy.
Sure.
But getting him in those sort of like individual skill sets, like comparing him to guys who were like that at the position, and thinking about which one would I value more, helped me kind of sort out my preferences.
I think what's interesting about, so I did rank them, but what's interesting about your approach is if you get to the place where you're selecting from some of these guys, right? We're talking about in a redraft, starting probably in the 3rd round, right? On down, maybe even the 4th round on down. And you are picking based on, at that point, kind of roster construction. What is it I need from this position, right? Do I need average? Do I need power? Do I need some steals because they're lacking everywhere and I need to find some cheap steals? Otherwise, I'm screwed. And so I think we naturally sort in the way that you did. Even if we have them ranked in a linear fashion, we do sort them that way in our heads, which I find that really interesting, that you did it that way. Which one do you want to start with first?
Well, my suggestion for the way we could proceed was maybe just to go through your list, and then when we get to the player, I could talk about where I had him ranked, in relation to his peers, the way I view their skills, and then hopefully contribute that way.
Sure. I have Tristan Casas at what is that, at 6. I love him. I think he's your next perennial 35 home run hitter. I didn't bring up his second half stats. He had a phenomenal second half last season. He's 24 years old. He had 24 homers and 502 plate appearances last season, but he really did hit his stride in the second half. 13.9% walk rate for a 24-year-old. To me, there's a lot to like about his selectivity. I think that there are times where he's not passive, but I think his approach will morph and change as he gets older and matures. 42.3% fly ball. He does not pull the ball nearly as much as some of the others on this list, but in my mind, that's a huge positive in Boston, right? If you got a lefty, I always think of Wade Boggs, right? You've got a lefty who can serve the ball off the wall. Casas has the bat skills to be able to do that, I think, with the right pitches. There's just a lot to love. His chase rate is below league average at 24 years old. His chase contact is above league average, which I don't necessarily love. I don't think that's always a great thing, but it's a good place to start. His BABIP wasn't out of control high. It was 317. His zone contact is lower than league average at 80.3%. But again, there are a lot of superstar players who are below league average with zone contact and able to really impact the ball when they do hit it. He's just kind of, everything says his hard hit rate, his barrel rate, his launch angle, everything is in line for him to take these next steps up, I think, over the next couple of years to a place where he is the, like I said, the perennial 35 home run, 270, 280 hitter. And I love him. I tried to acquire him in our league because I do think that he's kind of the next, he and Guerrero are the two younger first basemen that I really feel like I can count on and being kind of superstars for the next 5 years or so. If I could trade Freeman for Casas at this point, I probably would. I am looking up real quickly his second half last season. He hit, let's see, he hit,
309,
yep, with,
309, 412, 598.
is that what you have? I have,
Yeah.
you must be parsing it a little differently. I have 317, 417, 617 slug and a 1.034 OPS, whatever the case is, and a
We're
175.
real close.
Yeah, 175 WRC plus, right?
Yeah.
That's nuts. And I don't expect him to be a 175 WRC plus player, but I think it speaks to what he's capable of, that he was able to do that over the course of months and not weeks. Like I said, I love him. He probably has the biggest up arrow for me of any of the players on my list. And I already aggressively have him at 6. What bucket does he fall in for you? And do you agree or disagree with any of those things I said?
We love walks. I think it's if you could make a coffee analogy, it'd be like Central America for us of coffee. We like walks here. That's our position. So
Right.
yeah, the 13.5% or the 13.9% walk rate. It's a great start. But no, I have Tristan in the right behind Alonso in my power tier as this my second preferred option after Alonso.
Mhm.
I think the only real questions I have are his splits. He improved last year, but there has been in 2022 there was a split, and then he got better as the year went on, as you said. We also had 360 BABIP, but he's always performing better against right-handers. However, I don't necessarily think that that's going to limit him going forward. That would just be something that I'd want to monitor to make sure Boston's not going to look to get him out of the lineup. Because I think he is going to have to play every day, because I think their best lineup is going to have Yoshida at DH pretty much every day because they can't play him in the outfield. Their roster's a little wonky to me. I'm not quite sure how it all comes together, but
It's super
I think
wonky.
he's in the middle of it regardless, right? So yeah, 263, 367, 490 in his first full season. He battled a couple of minor injuries, but the quality of contact and the plate skills, I don't have any concerns about the swing and miss. It was 25% carry as a, again, first full season. I don't think that's any concerning of at all. And only 11% swinging strike rate, especially when you're balancing that with the plate approach that he had, only chasing 26% of the time. I mean, that's 4% better than league average as a rookie.
Right.
So, and the last thing I'll say about that I really like about him is, yes, I think he has a power ceiling, but as you highlighted in his profile, he's not someone who's selling out for pulls. He's not selling out for fly balls. His pull rate is only 38%. His fly ball rate is 40%. Like, we want that, right? We want him to be able. We want to see it over 40%, but he's not going like 47, 48. Whereas Babbitt's going to crater, and his ground ball rate's only is 37%. His launch angle is 16. So I see a guy who's going to have a solid batting average because he is not just selling out to lift. He's going to spray it some. He's take it the other way off the green monster, and actually not hurt you when it comes to batting average, which, or for us, is hits or whatever. I like the contact. I like the variability of not just one approach, right? And when you have a play discipline on top of that, I am really would be excited to have him.
Is interesting because he's exactly what his pedigree said, right? When he came up through the minors, he probably has a 35 home run ceiling despite being like 6'4", 250 pounds. You expect him to hit more homers, but he's a better hitter than you expect, right? The hit tool is closer to a 60 than a 55, coupled with 60 to 65 power. The last thing is, what's interesting about the split last year was, I think against tough lefties, he's just looking, a lot of times he's looking to walk. So 18.6% walk rate versus lefties, 12.8 versus righties. I think that's part of his approach against lefties, is to become even more passive or look for a specific pitch and take walks, which honestly works. If that's going to be your approach and you're going to have an 18.6% walk rate against that side, I have nothing against that.
Yeah.
At what is that, 7, I have Cody Bellinger. He qualifies at both first and outfield. Where you choose to prioritize him is kind of up to you. Everyone knows what he did last season, 95 runs, 97 ribs, 26 homers, 20 steals. He hit 307. I'm not even going to dig really into his advanced metrics much, because I think the variability between, or the roller coaster ride between his last 5 seasons is so crazy that I don't know how you just look at him and predict this is what he's going to do. And I think anybody who thinks they can just say this is who Cody Bellinger is fooling themselves, because he's been so all over the board the last couple of years. Yes, I do have him at 7. This is based on him doing something similar to what he did last year. His numbers say he's like a Freddie Freeman light, right? Fewer everything across the board, but still a 300 hitter with 20 plus steals and 20 plus home runs. If he goes back to Chicago, I think that's a good thing for his statistics. I expect him to be a Cub in 2024, but like I said, I don't have a ton to say about him. He's great if you want power and speed at the position. Especially if he signs that huge deal, which you expect him to, you're looking at a guy who's probably going to hit 3rd in that lineup. He's gonna produce. Again, not my favorite player because of the variability in performance over the course of the last few seasons, but a player that deserves to be ranked here, in my opinion.
This is working out well so far. So I have Bellinger at the top of my 5-tool tier.
Mm-hmm.
What's going on, or what I hear in the ecosphere, is that, well, look at his barrel rate, look at his hard hit rate, which
Sure.
I think goes into what you and I talked about 10 minutes ago, right? There's this fixation right now upon these certain statistics, and you see the blue in that area and like, oh, he's shit now.
Right.
What I see is a guy who 2 years ago was striking out like left and right, didn't know what, was just kind of lost when he had that shoulder injury. He had a single-digit strike rate.
Yeah.
To me, that's really damn impressive.
Right.
And then I open his Savant page, and he's over 80th percentile in every single category:
Yep.
base running, fielding, hitting. So what does that tell me? He's good at baseball.
Yep.
And to me, he looked healthy last year.
Right.
So yeah, and as I think you said last time, I can't remember what the stat was, but you said this guy has such and such like 240 home run seasons on his resume. This guy has an MVP on his resume.
Right.
But you can't forget that. So whether or not he is the same version of the player that won that MVP, I just think he's really good at baseball.
Right.
And I think, yeah, to me, it's impressive that he was able to transform his game and say, I'm striking out too much. I've got to get on base more. I got to make more contact. And he did that. And yeah, the swinging strike rate, only 9.4, only 50% K rate. And yeah, he didn't hit the ball as hard. But 8 of his 26 home runs were to center opposite field. And that's almost a third of them. And you can't, guys with mid power don't hit home runs the opposite way.
Mm-mm.
So he still has power in his bat, and he's premium speed at first base, can play multiple positions. He's only 28. Yeah, to me, he's clear cut. If you want a 5-category player, I think he's my first choice after the first tier guys.
You got to wonder too, like what is it about his approach that has changed? Because his strikeout rate last year was similar to his MVP season, sandwiched, or the bread on the outside of the sandwich. What was in the middle?
Yeah.
The 2 years in between that were, or the 3 years in between that were, really elevated strikeout rates, right? 26.9%, 27.3%. But his launch angle increased in 21 and 22 and went back to where it was in 19 last season. The barrel rate was half of what it was. The hard hit rate wasn't quite what it was, but he's still, I think what he's showing is and sometimes some of the hard hit metrics come down when you're trying to figure out where to hit the ball. You're not just trying to impact it, right? Like right. What would Tony Gwynn's hard hit or Tony Gwynn's hard hit rate be, right? What would certainly his barrel rate would be next to zero or close to zero. So yeah, I think Bellinger is talented. He's skilled. I think that I'd be really scared if my team gave him a huge contract because of the variability, but I think he belongs here as far as I'm concerned. Next guy on my list should be a fun one. We both rostered him. Neither of us roster him anymore, and it's a 24-year-old Spencer Torkelson. Last season, 684 plate appearances, 31 home runs, 88 runs, 94 RBIs. He only hit 233. He is I'm assuming he's in your power tier. I don't know where you put him. 46.8% fly ball rate, 47.7% pull rate. Like, this dude is trying to hit home runs. That much is clear.
Yeah.
Where do you have him? How do you feel about him? I know we both have some form of emotional attachment or have previously with Spencer Torkelson.
No, you pegged him right for me. Yeah, he's in my power tier. I have him fifth. So it goes Alonso, Cassis. We've talked about both Hoskins, Walker, and then I have Torque.
Mm-hmm. Having him here for me is a bet on his youth and some of the progress we saw last year in his approach. And I watched him quite a bit because I did roster him last year. He hits the ball so hard. I don't even think his metrics, they don't spell out how hard he actually hits it, at least from a visual standpoint. It was a 14.1% barrel rate, but a 50.5% hard hit rate, right? The park scares me. The organization definitely scares me. If you're talking about an organization that you want to count on for developing the skills or the talent that hitters come in with, it's not the Detroit Tigers. At least within the Alex Avila years, it wasn't, or in the Al Avila years, it wasn't. Maybe now it is, but look at Riley Green, right? Look at Austin Meadows when he was there. You look at Torkelson, he's kind of stalled out a bit. You've got so many players and players coming up, Jace Young, Colt Keith, right? They're a stay away from me, not just because the park is huge, but because they haven't really developed great hitters in years and years and years. So I put Torque here because he really did scuffle a lot last season, and he still put up 31 home runs, and you give him 12 more runs and 6 more RBIs, and he's 100 runs, 100 RBIs. It's not difficult to envision age 25, 100 runs, 35 homers, and 100 RBIs, right? That still might be a 250 season, but so what? That's huge production. I have him above Walker, and I have him above, who's the other one you mentioned, above Hoskins, only because I think he's physically reaching his prime now, whereas those other guys are on the downside. But I think they're very similar players from a production standpoint for the next year or two. My next player is actually Christian Walker. He's a player that I really don't like a whole lot, but that's just a personal preference. But he is a player who last season put up 33 homers and 103 RBIs and sneakily 11 steals, which I didn't know until I started putting this spreadsheet together. You said you have Walker third in your power tier?
Fourth, right ahead of Torque, right behind Hoskins.
Got it. If you compare he and Hoskins, what is it that you like about Hoskins more than Walker?
I think if I'm looking at a player like this, I like Hoskins' career 846 OPS and 13.5% walk rate.
Mm-hmm.
Because to me that just adds some stability to the profile. Walker, I rostered him 2 years ago. Watched a lot of obviously the postseason when the Diamondbacks went far, so I'm pretty familiar with him. I'm gonna say he's streaky, but he looks to me when I watch him, it's like he has one swing, and yeah, he doesn't necessarily chase a ton. I just like Hoskins' plate approach better. It just gives me a more, again, I think an 846 career OPS kind of speaks to, and it's only 24% K rate. So I like how I feel safer with Hoskins.
Mm-hmm.
Walker feels like, I don't know, he just doesn't excite me.
Well, he could.
I don't know what else to say.
And I think there are some things about Walker's profile that I could see the bottom fall out a little bit. Wouldn't surprise me. Um, he doesn't, as you said, he chases. Last year he chased a little bit over league average, but I don't know. I don't love him. I think that offense is going to continue to be good. I think he will continue to get 100 RBIs. I think we're in the same
He's
boat.
just not a standout. Like
He's
he
not a
gets
player on
good
my roster.
results. He's a good, decent hitter, but like he doesn't stand out in like his best hits. His doesn't stand out in quality of contact. He doesn't stand out in swinging strike rate. He doesn't stand out in walk rate.
Right.
And yeah, his 5-0 rate's 45%, his pull rate's 43%. So, I think there's a cap on his batting average, and the sneaky steals were nice. But yeah, I'm not super invested.
Right. But I do think Hoskins, Torkelson, they're very similar players when you start to look at what you expect their statistics to be at the end of 24. I have Vinny Pasquantino next. If he can stay healthy, I know we've talked about the fact that he's had a shoulder issue, which is scary. And he has not put it together as of yet. But when you see the ability to make contact, the ability to make hard contact, right? I think it's easy to envision a 300 hitter. Quite honestly, I think it's easy to envision a 300 hitter who is spraying the ball all over the place and hits 25 to 30 home runs. I think there's some of that. It's funny because there's such different body types, but there's some of that Freddie Freeman kind of contact going on, I think, with Pasquantino. I still believe in him. I still have him above some of the other players, but I think I have him here in part because I don't like the players below him and not because it's a huge endorsement of Vinny Pasquantino. I also think that offense is trash. He's going to need Bobby Witt Jr. to be in front of him the whole time or on base in front of him the whole time. And so this is probably aggressive for Pasquantino given the injury and the team context, but I'm going to gamble that he is able to put a full season together and capitalize on some of the things that we've seen from him previously. I already know he's probably not on your top 60 or in your on your list, I assume.
I do have him in the balance tier, below Josh Naylor and Anthony Rizzo. To me, like I'm familiar with the pedigree. As I've already said, our position is we like walks. I think he has some approach issues to work out. He's chasing 6% above league average, and he's only swinging 63% of the time, which is very low. So again, I just think there's some selectivity and approach issues that he needs to be working through. And his season was interrupted by a pretty serious injury. So I can understand why that development might be stunted. But the things I like about him, you highlighted well. I think I have in my balanced tier. He could bring, I think, average ability to spray the ball, ability to get on base with some power. He's not a zero power. I think that's in his profile. He had a 190 ISO, even though he played injured. Just pretty solid. So yeah, I like that you said that he could hit 300 because like that's what Naylor did last year, and I think that's something that guys who make contact like that and can spray the ball are assets in certain builds and certain teams, and I value that.
I think that I put him here because I think the ceiling is actually really high. It's just very questionable as to whether he's ever going to reach that ceiling. Next, I have Paul Goldschmidt. I think that it's reflective for me in part that I think, this is basically a redraft list, but dynasty stuff does creep into my head sometimes when I'm ranking these guys. Goldschmidt he's an odd player, right? There's things about him that I don't love. The zone contact is below league average. I talked about how that's not always horrible, but the chase contact is really high. And I think he makes poor contact sometimes when he chases. And the fact that he has such good bat to ball skills hurts him. Swinging strike rate is above 10%. The K rate, 23.4%. I think it's starting to creep a little bit. The big thing for me is he did have 25 homers and 11 steals and 89 runs and 80 RBIs, but he required 687 plate appearances to do it. So is he going to stay healthy? Are they going to try to rest him more? And at age 36, do those counting stats come down slightly? Say it's 600 plate appearances instead of 687. And he plays the way that he did last year. Now you're looking at 80 runs, 21 homers, 73 RBIs and 8 steals, which is fine in this tier, but I'm not putting him up there with Casas and Guerrero and some of the other players that I think places where we see him rank sometimes. What do you got with Goldschmidt?
Yeah, I had him in second in my 5-tool tier behind Bellinger because I think he does have that track record of contributing some steals.
Mm-hmm.
And he is a max volume player when healthy. I spent a lot of time looking at him. I was trying to trade for him in our home league. He was listed on the trade block, so I've been studying him quite a bit this offseason. Those efforts did not come to fruition, which honestly I'm okay with. But I honestly came away just kind of throwing my hands up. I really couldn't find anything definitive as to why he dropped off last year.
Right.
His contract rate did drop by, but it was only by 2%, and his whiff rate was also higher, but again only 2%. He pulled the ball 5% less, and his fly ball rate was pulled down 2%. So putting that all together, it tells me maybe he was a little bit, maybe the bat was a little bit slower, couldn't quite get out in front, maybe a little less bat speed. He missed, and he's doing bat speed training this offseason. However, his hard contact rate was the hardest of his career. So max, his max, his ability to impact the ball is not degrading. His play discipline and approach were all flat versus career norms, and really no change in his chase rate or swinging strike rate or his approach. And he showed no loss of speed. He's only 26th percentile, but that was the same as 2022. So
Right.
I came away from it saying this guy, I'm just not sure. And then you throw in the bat speed training and the whole go to driveline, which is the new best shape of their life, which has become
Right.
narrative that we hear all the time.
Right.
It's easy to say, oh, that's just going to magically fix it. At the end of the day, if he gives you something close to what he's done, I think he'd be worth this pick. I'm going to have him in second in this tier because he still posted 268, 363, 447 as an 810 OPS with a 13% walk rate. And like you said, but he's 36. Dude's 36, right? I'm here for the old guys. I'm 46. So keep it going, Paul.
Right.
So
Well, what
yeah,
do you let me ask you this.
I
What
just
do you expect, what's the ceiling from a Paul Goldschmidt season at age 36? Those are some of the questions that I ask. It's why I think
right.
I'm aggressive. I'm aggressive with Casas. I'm aggressive with Torkelson. I'm aggressive with Pasquantino. And I think I ask myself that question. If I'm comparing players, what is this player's 100th percentile season at this particular point in their progression versus what's the floor? And which one do I want more based on my roster? And so the question is, what is the Paul Goldschmidt really good age 36 season look like? Right? Is it 100 runs and 35 home runs and 100 RBIs? Is it 90, 30, 90? And what's the OPS? Is it 850 or is it 950? Right? Those are the questions I ask myself. What is your answer?
Yeah.
Why were you
My answer, yeah.
pursuing?
My answer would be 270, 350, 490 with an 820 OPS and 25 home runs and 180 runs in RBI. I don't think he'll get to triple digits. I don't think he'll hit 30 home runs. But the reason I was pursuing him is I was looking for plate appearances.
Sure.
I look at my competitors in our league, and I think I have a lot of variability. Otani's coming back from Tommy John. I roster guys like Corey Seager, who's never plays a full season. I need more plate appearances. So that's why I was seeking him, as I thought I need somebody who's going to post 650 plate appearances on a decent team, right? To add some stability to my group. I think I have a lot of talent.
Right.
I wanted more stability. But anyway, yeah, that's kind of what I think would be a high outcome for him this year.
Sure. I think your point's well taken as far as his just be his ability to post each and every year.
Yeah.
That's huge. You can't have a team full of, you can have a team full of like rate stat guys, but we're not playing roto with a bunch of ratios. We're playing, right? We're counting hits,
Right.
counting
Yeah.
runs and homers and RBIs. And it's just, it is hard to function without lots of guys who just hit over and over and over and over and over again. Next is probably the most controversial player for me, or player I can't really, yeah, I'd say
I
controversial.
guess
Yeah,
Yanni Diaz.
correct. Correct.
Yes.
I think he's fool's gold. And it's funny to say that about a 932 OPS hitter, right? Who with 600 plate appearances. If we've said this about Yandy Diaz for so many years. If he can hit the ball in the air, he's a star. And if he can't, he's just a high average, no power player. And last year we saw him be able to elevate some, right? Not a ton, but some, enough to hit 22 home runs in 600 plate appearances. But his fly ball rate was 28.6%, and his ground ball rate was 52%. And so if you want a 300 hitter and you don't care that they hit, here's the other thing with Diaz is, so last year, 330, 932 OPS, 95 runs, 22 homers, 78 RBIs, no steals. Great, fine. Numbers aren't bad. 932 OPS is great. Do you like your first baseman hitting at the very top of a lineup, right?
Yeah.
Without the premium RBI production, because that's what you're getting if he's going to be your first baseman. As a CI or as a util, I get it. But if he's your starting first baseman and your kind of ceiling for RBIs is 80 and you need 650 plate appearances to get there, and he's age 32, like, I'm not buying it. And I guarantee you 22 home runs is the most home runs he hits in a season for his career, because the portion
I agree.
last season was an anomaly. So if he was third base eligible like he used to be, I could see him being ranked pretty high at third. First base, he's all the way down at, what is that, 13 for me, because I just can't, or 12. I can't stomach it. I think he's an empty 300 hitter from this point forward with a good OPS because of the on-base percentage, but he's not my cup of tea. What do you got to add on Diaz?
Yeah, the narrative was like, oh, he's finally changed his swing, or he's lifting the ball. He had a 3-year. It's been 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 years since he had a launch angle lower than he did last year.
Yeah.
It was 4 years ago, he had a 5.7. The last 3 years, it was 7.9, 6.5, 7.7. He was back down to 5.7. These are all great things. 410 OBP, 402 WOBA, 7% swinging strike rate, 11% walk rate, 164 WRC plus. But yet his ground ball rate is 52.7. His fly ball rate is 29%. And he's slow. He's like super slow.
He's super slow.
And I think the only guy who hits the ball harder than him is Matt Olson and Bryce Harper. And the only reason he hits 300 is because he hits the crap out of the ball, right? Because anything else, like, they're going to start backing up, taking away his hits.
Right.
And he hits lead off. So it's like, if I read you those skills, like, you want that guy, you would say yes. But then it's in this package where,
at first,
like you said, at first base with no power. So I had him in his own tier because, like, he has all these skills. He's productive. He hits lead off for the Rays. There's the other thing that I have this perception of him that he misses a lot of time, right? Because he's always nicked up, right? I looked at the last time he went on the IL was in 2020 with a strained hamstring.
Right.
3 years ago. I feel like every day I'm reading like Bruce Hand, Bruce Calf,
right,
Bruce Quadricep. Right. Yeah, he plays the next day. He keeps posting, but I have this perception that he doesn't play all the time. But he constantly leaves games early. He's constantly like, you're like, is he going to play or not? Like, that's just my experience with him. But yeah, he clearly keeps posting. Right. So I don't know, man. Like, is there a team where I can see, like, I would want him? I can see a way, but do I want to plan on having him? I don't.
And he's not your starting first baseman, probably, right? He's your corner infielder, your util. A couple other things with him. I always question Tampa. I think the minute he shows any signs of deterioration, right? I think that could be Curtis Mead's job because he's so bad defensively. Could be Jonathan Aranda's job. It's definitely going to be Xavier Isaac's job in 2 years. Like there's just, I don't know. And then I looked up his monthly splits in June, 58.4% ground ball rate. July, 60.7 ground ball rate. August, 50%, September, October, 53.5%. But then you look at his production during those months. He had in June, he had no homers. In July, he had 2 homers, and in August, he had 3. He went 3 months with 5 homers total. And it coincides directly with that ground ball rate, right? And so if you're counting on something that we've rarely seen from him to carry him, it doesn't mean he's not a 300 hitter. He is, but he's a really empty one. So I think he's being tremendously overvalued in a lot of drafts, in a lot of leagues, going into this season. So we already covered Hoskins. The other 3 guys I have Hoskins at 14. The other 3 guys on my list are Anthony Santander, Spencer Steer, and Josh Naylor. Santander, there's not a whole lot to say. He's 29. I'm sure he's like number 6 in your power tier if you have him ranked as a first baseman, something like that.
Yeah, I have him with Paredes in the power light tier.
Yep.
I think they're guys who have a certain approach, have flaws, but also post and hit in positive positions on their team's lineup to get RBIs.
Yep.
But don't have premium power and don't have, athleticism or, bring any other tools in terms of speed or anything to the kind of, but you can count on it. I think you can count on them for home runs and RBIs, but not at the upper tier of power.
Right. I agree. I do think Santander does have a few more home runs in his bat. I think there's a little more scoring runs upside with Santander than there might be with Paredes, but that could change certainly with Paredes batting somewhere different in the lineup. I like Paredes a lot. You know me, I was super early on in love with him. I think that we've talked about this at length, especially with Matt. I do worry about something that's an approach that's so pull heavy, right? As
Sure.
Paredes. And I do think that if he's pitched differently and is unable to pull, then he becomes a higher average, lower power player, which takes some of the specialness away from him. But I do like him as a hitter. And that Baltimore offense for Santander is going to be phenomenal. So I think there's just tremendous opportunity. Hoskins, we've talked about. I think Hoskins is right there with Walker and Torkelson. I think he's 30 home runs plus in Milwaukee, lower average runs and RBIs, depending on where he hits. Steer, I reluctantly put him at 15. Spencer Steer plays for the Reds. Doesn't necessarily have a regular position. He did hit 23 homers and had 15 steals, and everybody falls in love with that, but he did it in 665 plate appearances. So if you're telling me in 665 plate appearances in a launching pad that is Cincinnati, you hit 23 home runs, I'm calling you a true 18 home run hitter, right, per year. I don't think there's a lot of upside with Steer. I get that he's pretty athletic. He does have a above 10% walk rate. The other thing is he's just not. You could see a situation where he becomes there's so much talent, young talent on that team, that Spencer Steer is more of a utility guy than a starting position player with 600 plus at bats. Noelvi Marte will certainly eat into Steer's plate appearances. I think Christian Encarnacion Strand may eat into Spencer Steer's plate appearances. So guaranteeing that player gets 665 plate appearances it's not happening. I don't think Matt McLean is losing plate appearances to Spencer Steer. And I certainly don't think Ellie or Noelvi Marte loses plate appearances to Spencer Steer. So how much is he going to play? And what is his upside? I don't think his upside is more than 25 home runs. And he's already at his athletic peak. He's 26 years old. So I think he is what he is. If you're okay with that at first, that's great. I don't see much more of a ceiling for him. Did you have Steer in your 5 category tier?
I did.
And
yeah, I have him. I had him the 4th after Goldschmidt, above Nolan Jones.
So if you had to pick between Steer and Nolan Jones in a redraft, who would you take?
Steer.
I think Jones is scary because the BABIP was above 400, but I also think there's some stuff there to like. I
He
think
has some serious approach issues.
he does.
He doesn't swing.
He
That's
does.
great. It's great that he doesn't like strike out as much, but he's not swinging.
He's
And yeah, as you mentioned, the BABIP, and then he has the whole home road atmospheric nonsense going on.
See, but the home road stuff, you can still count on him being at home. I don't know. It's like a CJ Crone was the same way in Colorado. He was crap on the road and he was great at home. But I'm not in on Nolan Jones at all. It was just for me to demonstrate at least Jones has a more of a ceiling than Steer does to me. And then the last player on my list is Josh Naylor at 16. Um, if he could only hit lefties, right? Or if they were only willing to let him hit lefties, might be a
yeah,
better
I
way to
think
put
he
it.
can, but yeah, it's the opportunity.
I think he's a skilled enough hitter to learn, but
Hmm.
but you're still, even as a platoon player, you're looking at 17 homers, 97 RBIs, and 10 steals, um, which is great. The one issue is that I hate to say is if he's going to play that little and hit where he does in the lineup, which is probably fourth, how many runs is he going to score? He scored 52 runs last season. And
They have to find more offense. And yeah, I have questions about the depth chart. I don't question his talent, and like he had a better OPS against the lefties in the second half last year.
mhm,
But I think it was they probably you have to give that the small sample caveat because I don't know that he played 100% of the time,
right,
but he started to hit him better. And I think I know Francona had said like we have to start giving him the chance, and they started giving him chances, and he did it.
yeah.
But again, I don't know if it was 100% max. But to your point, I don't know that he gets max playing time. In fact, they brought in two right-handed bats that makes me think that he's not.
Right. You with De Los Santos, you mean?
Yeah, and Manzardo.
Well, Manzardo's left, and I think
Oh,
Manzardo,
is he a lefty? My
and I
bad.
think
My
he's
bad.
the heir apparent. Um,
I was surprised they didn't trade him,
I
honestly,
think
because they're coming up on arbitration.
I think they may. I think they may, and I think he would thrive elsewhere depending on where he hits in the lineup. I still love his skill. If you're willing to, I think he's more of a CI than he is a starting first baseman again because of the plate appearance thing. But he produces when he plays, and I love the skills. If he went to a team that would play him every day, I think you would be looking at 23, 24 homers. And if he hit third or he hit, even second or or fourth on a good team, then you're looking at 70, 80 runs and 80 RBIs, which puts him right there with any of the rest of the guys on this list. I think he's up there with, Goldschmidt and Yandy and those sorts of guys. Different, like value wise, up there with Christian Walker, just different type of production. I could see him getting better. I'm going to run down. Is there anybody you really want to talk about? I can run down the other guys I have here if you want to comment on any of them.
I have one, but why don't you go ahead and we'll see. Maybe he'll come up.
We'll probably run into them. I've got Paredes just below. You could make a case to get him anywhere after, say, 10 for me, 9 or 10. Wilmer Flores, I have on the list. Brandon Belt, we don't know where he's playing. Christian Encarnacion Strand, who I talked about earlier. I am really low on him compared to consensus. Through 24 with the sub 6% walk rate and a K rate above 28%. That's not my guy. Brandon Drury is, to borrow a term, is very much oatmeal, but provides production. Justin Turner, Lamont Wade, I have on the list. That was a player you rostered last year. I think Wade and Naylor probably gave you great production between the two. Ryan Mountcastle, right-handed power hitter in Baltimore, is just scary. Nathaniel Lowe, I think, is vastly overrated. Ryan Noda is an interesting one in Oakland that I kind of like. Alec Bohm, Jose Abreu, I think could possibly be on this list. Rowdy Tellez has a full-time job in Pittsburgh. Nolan Jones, and then I got Josh Bell, Ty France, and Luis Ariz. Those are not in any particular order. It's just guys that I think can provide low-end production at this position, or a CI if you play in those kinds of leagues. Is there anyone for you on that list that you want to tackle, or who's the guy that you were thinking?
Just give me a quick second here.
Right.
So Bunsen, this weird thing is when I try to go to splits, it won't show them to me.
Huh.
I don't. It's been doing it to me the last couple of days. I don't know if I have to download a different browser or what. Um, no. Honestly, I don't want to be cagey. I hesitate to say this. I don't know how much of our league mates listen to this. You have Freddie Freeman,
Dude.
and so you don't care. Um, I think Anthony Rizzo, the guy had a brain injury last year.
Right.
I completely throw out his numbers. I don't care.
Right.
And certainly in spring, if they're resting him, if he's not recovered, my understanding from the news cycle, which granted he was out of it because he didn't play after they finally diagnosed him correctly,
Sure.
was that at the end of the year he started to feel more normal in himself. If he is himself, like mentally,
Mhm.
to me, like he's being slept on, and I want him.
Sure.
So his career numbers speak for themselves, and I think the shift restrictions, he was playing like a man on fire last year before his injury,
Yeah.
and then all his numbers got tanked
Yep.
after he got because he was trying to play with it, right? So we really haven't seen him play with the shift restrictions, and he's going to hit fourth behind Soto and Judge if he's healthy. And last time I checked, those guys have pretty good OBPs.
Right.
So and yeah, I just think with his skills, a career 364 OBP, career 830 OPS, 15% walk rate in that park, double digit walk rate. I think he could be really good, and I think no one's talking about him, and that's fine with me because I want him if he's healthy. So he was the guy that stuck out for me. Which when you're going through the stats and stuff, he just disappears, right? Because he's 34 and his numbers last year sucked. But he gets a pass from me because he had a brain injury. But yeah, he's someone to me that I think could be exceptionally valuable just based on his track record. He's still a tremendous defender.
Uh-huh.
He's someone like Freeman who's going to take a bag when you're not walking, right? And he's just super smart. And couldn't believe how good of a fielder he still is. He was in the 91st percentile
Mhm.
for his fielding. So I don't know. I always cause thought he was kind of chesty and arrogant, but as he's gotten older, I've appreciated him more and more.
I like it. I think there's, from what I can see, I think Torres hits fourth potentially. Maybe Rizzo hits fifth, but even so, you're talking about Judge and Soto in front of somebody, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think there is like high end production potential there if what held him back last year was indeed the concussion. And I think you're right. From a production standpoint, he could be slotted in right there for me with Torque, Walker, Pasquantino, Goldschmidt, right? Would I rather gamble on Rizzo or Pasquantino? You could make the argument that it's Rizzo and not Pasquatch. So I see it. I don't know if it's a risk I would want to take. I don't know if I would want him to be my starter, but I think again in a util position, at a position that doesn't make a ton of errors, in our league, I think that would be huge. I like it. I think in that bucket of the guys that I named plus Rizzo, you find your flavor and you roll with it, right? I think each of us has a player on that list that we kind of like. I
Hoskins
appreciate
interests me as well, but I think he's going to be more
a little more
in demand.
expensive. Yeah, I think
Yeah.
Ty France, I'm interested in. If you look at France's numbers pre last season, he was really good. He was running mid high 120s for WRC plus. He's going to drive line, take it for what it's worth. I think it's worth something. I like him there. I like Ryan Noda a lot. I don't think he's going to ever be great, but I love the walk rate so much that I think he's an interesting play at times. And I think a player like Brandon Drury is slept on a ton because he produces. We doing second base next week?
Sounds good to me. Yeah.
I've got my ranks ready. I'm good to go.
Damn it, you're ahead of me.
Yeah, I can't wait. I can't wait. Um, cool, man. I appreciate this. We'll get this up for everyone to see tonight. And we'll be back next week with second base. You got anything to add on first base before we're done?
No, good. Thanks, Tino.
You got it, brother. Thank you. Get some rest.
Will do.
Appreciate it, bro.